Welcome, brave souls, to the Haunted Tales, where we explore the darkest corners of the world, unearthing the legends and nightmares that lurk in the shadows. Tonight, we journey to the historic state of Massachusetts, a land rich with eerie tales of restless spirits, haunted asylums, and ghostly whispers carried by the New England wind. From colonial graveyards to abandoned prisons, these locations are steeped in blood-chilling stories that defy explanation. Turn off the lights, check your surroundings, and prepare for a descent into terror. This is Top Most Haunted Places in Massachusetts. The shadows of 92 2nd Street, Fall River, Massachusetts, had always been a quiet town. But on 92 2nd Street, the past refused to stay buried. The Lizzie Borden House, infamous for the brutal axe murders of Andrew and Abby Borden in 1892, had long since been converted into a bed and breakfast. It attracted curious tourists, ghost hunters, and the occasional skeptic. For Emma Carter, an independent journalist with a love for the macabre, the house was a dream assignment. Her editor had tasked her with writing a piece on America's Most Haunted Places, and no place carried more infamy than the Borden House. She arrived on a crisp October evening. The house loomed under the gray sky, its dark windows resembling vacant eyes. The old wooden structure groaned as if whispering warnings to those who dared enter. "Welcome to the Lizzie Borden House," said Margaret, the innkeeper, an elderly woman with tired eyes. "You're staying in Lizzie's old room, dear. Hope you don't scare easily." Emma chuckled. "I've stayed in haunted hotels before. I think I'll be fine." Margaret offered a knowing smile, but said nothing more. She handed Emma a brass key and gestured toward the dimly lit staircase. The room where she slept, Emma's room, was eerily preserved, as if Lizzie herself had just stepped out. The antique bed creaked beneath her as she sat down, placing her recorder and notebook on the nightstand. The heavy floral wallpaper seemed to breathe in the flickering light of the bedside lamp. "Just another night," Emma muttered, flipping through her research notes. The murders played over in her mind. Andrew Borden, found on the couch, his face nearly unrecognizable from multiple axe strikes. Abby Borden, slain in the upstairs guest room, her skull split open. And Lizzie, was she a murderer or a wrongly accused woman? Outside, the wind howled. The old house shifted, as if adjusting to her presence. Footsteps in the hallway at 2:17 a.m. A sound startled Emma awake. Footsteps. Soft, deliberate, just outside her door. She held her breath, listening. The floorboards creaked, inching closer to her room. Then silence. Emma reached for her phone, flipping on the flashlight. She tiptoed to the door and pressed her ear against the wood. Then, 3 slow knocks. A chill raced down her spine. She hesitated before twisting the doorknob. The hallway was empty. A draft whispered through, carrying the faint scent of rose water and decay. "Hello?" Emma whispered. No response. She stepped out cautiously, her bare feet pressing against the cold wooden floor. A faint glow spilled from the guest room, the very room where Abby Borden had been murdered. Emma's heart pounded. Slowly, she pushed open the door. The bed was made pristine, but the mirror on the vanity dripped with condensation, as if someone had been breathing against it. And then, a whisper. "She knows you're here." Emma spun around, her pulse hammering. Nobody was there. But the temperature had dropped drastically, her breath visible in the dim light. She backed out of the room and shut the door firmly. Just my imagination, she told herself, though she knew it wasn't true. A visitor in the dark. Emma decided to record an EVP, electronic voice phenomenon, session. She sat on the bed, turned on her recorder, and asked, "Is there anyone here with me?" Silence. "Did you kill Andrew and Abby Borden?" The air grew heavy, pressing against her chest. A soft thud came from the corner of the room. Emma let the recorder run for a few more minutes before playing it back. At first, there was nothing but static. Then, "Get out!" A deep, guttural voice. Not Margaret's, not Emma's. Something else. She clutched the recorder, her hands trembling. The air turned thick with the scent of iron, and suddenly, the walls dripped red, thick, viscous blood seeping through the wallpaper. Emma gasped, stumbling backward. But when she blinked, it was gone. The walls were normal. No blood, no voice, nothing. "I'm losing it," she whispered. But she wasn't. Lizzie's warning. She tried to sleep but felt something watching her. The air crackled with unseen energy. Then, her bed dipped, as if someone had sat at the edge. Emma froze. A voice, barely above a whisper, right by her ear. "She's still here." Emma bolted upright. The room was empty, but the sensation of someone beside her lingered. Something brushed against her ankle. She scrambled out of bed, her breath ragged. Enough was enough. She grabbed her things and made her way downstairs, determined to leave. But as she reached the front door, she stopped. Hanging on the wall was an old photograph, one she hadn't noticed before. It was Lizzie Borden, staring ahead with dark, lifeless eyes. But something was wrong. Lizzie's mouth, originally closed in the historical photo, was now smiling. And then, as Emma watched in horror, Lizzie's lips moved. "You shouldn't have come." The front door slammed shut. The last thing Emma heard before everything went black was the sound of an axe dragging across the floor. The madness within. Danvers State Hospital. The ruins of Danvers State Hospital loomed over the Massachusetts landscape like a skeletal corpse, its towering Gothic spires piercing the sky with a menace that refused to fade even after decades of abandonment. Despite its shuttered doors and crumbling walls, the asylum's reputation had never died. The locals still spoke of the horrors that had taken place within. Forgotten patients, unethical experiments, and something worse. Travis had heard the stories. He didn't believe them. He was a ghost hunter by trade, but a skeptic at heart. His YouTube channel had amassed a decent following by debunking haunted places, proving that most of them were nothing more than creaky floorboards and overactive imaginations. Danvers was just another challenge, another video to add to his collection. His team, Mark, Jenny, and Luis, were less eager. "I don't know, man," Mark muttered as they stood at the rusted gates of the asylum. "This place has a different vibe." Luis, the tech guy, adjusted the night vision camera on his shoulder. "That's the whole point, right? We go in, film some eerie shots, debunk the myths, and leave with 1,000,000 views." Jenny, the team's researcher, sighed. "Danvers isn't just another haunted building. The things that happened here, they weren't just urban legends." Travis smirked. "It's all stories. And we're here to prove that." He pushed open the gate. The wind howled through the decayed structure as they stepped inside. The grand entrance hall stretched before them, its once polished floors now covered in a thick layer of dust. Peeling wallpaper revealed rotting wood beneath, and wheelchairs stood abandoned in the corners like forgotten relics of madness. Jenny clutched her flashlight. This place used to house thousands of patients at once. Some never left. Louise glanced at her. Because they died? Because they disappeared. The team exchanged glances. Travis rolled his eyes and pressed forward. They moved through the main corridor, past the rusted remnants of patient rooms. The air smelled of mildew and decay, a suffocating mix that made every breath feel like a violation of the past. The deeper they went, the more the silence pressed against them, heavy and unnatural. Then came the whisper, faint, like the hiss of a distant radio. A voice, just beyond the range of comprehension. Jenny spun around. Did you hear that? Mark nodded, his face pale. It sounded like words. Luis lifted his camera. EVP recording on. Travis scoffed. It's just the wind through the vents. They continued, moving toward the infamous underground tunnels, where, according to legend, patients were taken when they were no longer useful. The entrance to the tunnels was hidden behind a rotting door at the end of the east wing. It took all of Travis's strength to pry it open. A gust of stale air greeted them. Jesus! Luis muttered, covering his nose. They descended. The tunnels were damp, lined with rusted pipes that dripped with foul-smelling water. The further they walked, the darker it became. Their flashlights barely pierced the void. Then, the whispering returned. Louder. Travis stopped. All right, let's figure out where that's coming from. Luis lifted the EVP recorder. The static crackled. Then a voice, clear as day. You shouldn't be here. The team froze. Jenny clutched Travis's arm. Tell me you heard that. He heard it. But he wasn't ready to admit it. Then came the scream. High-pitched. Agonized. It echoed through the tunnels, bouncing off the walls in a chorus of pain. Mark turned. Nope. I'm done. He started back toward the stairs, but before he could reach them, the tunnel lights flickered, lights that shouldn't have worked. For a fraction of a second, the corridor ahead was illuminated, and they saw them, figures. Shadowed, hunched figures staring from the darkness. Their faces were featureless, save for gaping mouths, twisted in silent screams. Then the light vanished. Jenny sobbed. Luis fumbled with the camera. Travis's heart pounded. Move! They ran. The air thickened, like unseen hands pressing against them, trying to hold them back. The whispering turned to shrieks, echoing through the narrow passageways. Something grabbed Travis's arm. Ice-cold fingers. He wrenched away, but the grip remained. Then he saw her. A woman, dressed in a tattered hospital gown, standing just inches away. Her head twitched at an unnatural angle, her eyes, black voids, locked onto his. She opened her mouth. An O sound came. Then she lunged. Travis fell backward, slamming against the wall. His team screamed. The entity vanished. Gasping, he scrambled to his feet. Run! They burst from the tunnels, up the crumbling stairs, through the halls that now seemed smaller, darker, as if the asylum itself was closing in. The whispering followed, never stopping. When they finally reached the front doors, Luis threw them open. Silence. The night air was cool, calming. The asylum stood behind them, as lifeless as it had been before. But Travis knew the truth now. The stories weren't just myths. Danvers State Hospital wasn't abandoned. It was waiting for them to return, and somehow, Travis knew, it wouldn't let them leave for long. The Hoosick Tunnel, North Adams, a haunting beneath the earth. The Hoosick Tunnel in North Adams, Massachusetts, is more than just an engineering marvel. It's a tomb, a scar in the earth where history and horror intertwine. Stretching nearly 5 miles through the Berkshires, the tunnel took over 2 decades to complete, earning its grim nickname, the Bloody Pit. The men who carved through the mountain paid a terrible price, and even now, over a century later, whispers echo in the darkness, carried on the cold, damp air that never sees the light of day. A journey into darkness. Ethan Caldwell had heard the stories. A freelance paranormal investigator, he made it his mission to visit America's most haunted sites. But the Hoosick Tunnel was different. It wasn't an abandoned asylum or a cursed house. It was a living, breathing passage still used by freight trains today. The tunnel had swallowed nearly 200 workers in its creation, and many believed their spirits had never left. Ethan arrived in North Adams just after dusk. The autumn air was crisp, the scent of damp leaves mixing with the faint metallic tang of train tracks. He parked his truck near the tunnel's eastern entrance, the yawning black mouth stretching into oblivion. Locals warned him not to go alone, but Ethan had never been one to shy away from danger. He slung his backpack over his shoulder, checked his flashlight, and stepped onto the tracks. The crunch of gravel beneath his boots was the only sound as he approached the opening. The deeper he went, the more the outside world faded, until only darkness remained. The first signs 100 yards in, his flashlight flickered. He tapped it, muttering under his breath, but it stayed on. The walls of the tunnel were damp, the scent of mildew thick in the stagnant air. A whisper brushed his ear, too faint to make out, but undeniable. Ethan froze. "Hello?" His voice echoed, swallowed by the void ahead. Silence. Then, a distant sound. A low, rhythmic tapping, as if someone were hammering deep within the mountain. He took a slow breath, pushing forward. He had read the reports: phantom lights, ghostly figures, even disembodied voices crying for help. But there was something worse. An entity known only as the Shadow Man. Witnesses claimed he wasn't a mere ghost but something older, something tied to the land itself. The deeper Ethan walked, the heavier the air became, as if unseen eyes watched his every move. The tunnel's victims. Halfway in, he reached the site of the worst accident in the tunnel's history, the explosion of 1867. Nearly 200 men worked to blast through solid rock, but one day, a miscalculation led to disaster. A tunnel shaft collapsed, trapping 13 men inside. For days, townspeople heard faint cries echoing from below, but there was no way to save them. When rescuers finally reached the cavern, they found evidence that the men had survived for some time, only to suffocate in the blackness. Ethan stood at the site, listening. A cold wind rushed past him, though there was no breeze in the tunnel. Then a sound, a ragged breath, followed by a whispering voice. "Help us!" He swung his flashlight around, the beam illuminating empty space. But then movement. Shadows stretched along the walls, shifting unnaturally. Ethan's heart pounded. He wasn't alone. The Shadow Man, a figure, emerged from the darkness ahead. At first, Ethan thought it was a trick of the light, but no, it was real. A man, dressed in 19th century work clothes, his face obscured by shadows. He took a step forward, and as the flashlight beam passed over him, his body flickered, as if he wasn't entirely there. Ethan tried to speak, but his throat tightened. The figure raised an arm, pointing behind him. Ethan turned out. A second shadow loomed, taller, darker. This one was not human. Its body was an abyss, darker than the tunnel itself, shifting like smoke. The temperature plummeted, Ethan's breath visible in the frigid air. Then, it lunged. The escape. Ethan stumbled back, running as fast as he could. His flashlight flickered violently, but he didn't dare stop. The tunnel stretched endlessly before him, his footsteps pounding against the rails. Behind him, the sound of chasing footsteps echoed in the void. The exit, he could see it. A distant glow of moonlight, salvation waiting just beyond the tunnel's grip. A whisper coiled around his ears, a voice ancient and knowing. "You shouldn't have come." The light flickered one last time, then died. Darkness swallowed him whole. The aftermath. When Ethan awoke, he was outside, lying in the gravel near the entrance. His camera was missing, his flashlight shattered beside him. His phone untouched. He checked the time. He had entered the tunnel at 10 p.m. It was now 3 a.m. 5 hours had passed, and he had no memory of how he got out. Shaking, he climbed into his truck, started the engine, and sped away. He never returned to the Hoosick Tunnel, but even now, in the quiet of the night, he sometimes hears it, the rhythmic tapping, the ghostly whispers, the echo of footsteps that don't belong. The tunnel still waits, and it never lets go. Massachusetts is a state where history and horror intertwine, where the past refuses to be forgotten, and where spirits continue to walk among the living. Do you dare visit these haunted locations, or will you heed the warnings of those who have encountered the supernatural firsthand? Tell us which haunted place intrigued you the most in the comments below, and if you've ever had a paranormal experience in Massachusetts, we'd love to hear your chilling tale. If you enjoyed this journey into the macabre, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss another terrifying story from the Haunted Tales. Until next time, stay in the light, and beware the shadows.